I'm Terrence James and you're watching another episode of Neutral Reviews, where we do real reviews for real decisions. And today we are looking at the all-new 2022 Subaru WRX Sport Model with manual. And I borrowed this vehicle from Subaru of London that has a fantastic location, friendly service, welcoming atmosphere, and some of the most fun, safe, and practical vehicles on the road, including this one. Now, I've been excited for a while to do this review, and not just because this is a new car with a lot of excitement right now, but because since this came to North America in 2002, I've wanted one. And it was when the tuner culture was first really being born in North America after the immense success of the first Fast and Furious movie that changed everything. Down came the posters of muscle cars and up went ones of lightweight, nimble sports cars. People stopped being divided over whether they were Dodge or Chevy people and started being divided over whether they were Honda or Toyota people. And people stopped asking if that thing had a Hemi in it and started asking if it had NOS. These Japanese cars became icons in North America overnight because they could outperform anything twice their price. And in the case of the WRX here, it was still as safe and practical as anything else on the road. So my point is, this car went from being a literal game changer to barely changing at all. And some of the things that they have changed, we might question why they changed in the first place. But the answer is that Subaru saw that the enthusiast was growing up and they needed to adapt the WRX to go the way of the adult. So we take a look today to see if this once boy racer econobox can rekindle our youthful enthusiasm for driving while still getting us to where we need to go in the relative comfort and convenience we've come to expect as adults. So let's take a look. Competition for this vehicle here, if you're looking for an above average all-wheel drive sedan that also looks distinctive on the road, you might look at something like a Mazda 3 GT4 or an Acura TLX. But most likely you're a boy racer at heart, and in that case you're looking at other modern enthusiast cars like your Golf R and your GTI or your Veloster N or your Honda Civic SI or your Type R or even a Kia Stinger all-wheel drive. But one thing that this car has that those others don't is a rally-bred, world-famous all-wheel drive system that comes standard. So let's talk performance, or the lack thereof, at least on paper. And that's what we said, things have not changed a lot. However, Subaru assures us, especially Subaru Japan, that this engine has changed a lot. It's not just simply the Ascent engine that's been ported over. They've done a lot of different things, including with the valve train and other things, to not only beef this engine up to be able to handle a lot more punishment that Subaru WRX drivers are probably going to put it through, but also to give a broader torque curve for better usability day to day and a nicer driving experience. Subaru says that this engine now produces 271 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque, which again is not a huge change, especially on the torque number. However, because of that broader torque curve, this engine does perform a lot better, Subaru says, on the road, and we'll test that later. Also with this engine too, we're told that it gets around 22 miles per gallon combined. That's what Subaru and most other people online are saying, which is about 1 or 2 miles per gallon better than that more aggressively tuned CVT, which also sends 5% more power to the rear as well. I don't think that's going to change things a lot in your driving dynamics, but just so you know. And this vehicle here, we're told, I have not tested it, but most people are coming in around 5.4, 5.6 seconds 0 to 60, and around 13.9 to 14.1 on the quarter mile, and you're looking at the high 90s to low 100 miles an hour, which again is moving pretty good for a car like this. And that power comes through these quad-style exhausts, which is a staple for the WRX. And we're happy to see that they've kept the symmetrical full-time all-wheel drive system that's rally-bred and world-famous in all models. When we come around and we look at things like suspension, they have actually retuned the suspension and re-engineered it to make this vehicle and its dampening especially more compliant, also with being more sporty and more firm in the corners. Wheels and tires, you have 17-inch on the base, and on the Sport and Sport Tech, you have these more aggressive 1/2 inch wider, 1 inch taller wheels with sport tires on them as well. And as far as brakes go, all models have 2-piston front brake calipers and 1 piston in the rear with vented all the way around. When we talk about steering, that has been re-engineered as well. And again, that's never been an issue with this car like the suspension, but they've done a nice job and re-engineered that to move things around on the rack to give this car better initial turn-in. And it's also still very, very quick and responsive with a 13.5 to 1 steering ratio. As we said, this car really doesn't share anything with the Impreza on the outside or powertrain, but it does share something that is a good thing, and it's that global architecture, that global platform. But what Subaru has done with this being one of their premier sporty vehicles, what they have done is they've actually taken that global architecture and reinforced it even more. You have more welds, more adhesives, and a few other little tweaks here and there to make this an extremely rigid vehicle, which brings it to the weight. This weight is pretty much the same weight, or actually less by a little bit than the previous generation in certain models. But it is 400 or 500 pounds heavier than the base Impreza that we know now. And that's because this car, as we said, is wider, longer, it has way more sportiness as far as performance features go, and way more safety features. So all in all, the engineers have done a wonderful job with this vehicle to keep it the weight that it is. But what we need to talk about is styling. So let's do that next. Now, to be fair, every time a new generation of WRX comes out, it's heavily scrutinized, and that's because people are passionate about this product. But this is a bit of a head scratcher. Now, Subaru says they designed it this way because that's what the focus group says. But I wonder if maybe they mixed up the notes with that group with the wilderness group, because they seem to have interpret more rugged with eliminating the track focus STI that everyone loved and replacing it with this wilderness edition. Now, despite all the complaining I'm doing, I do have to say this vehicle is very distinctive, is very attractive, is growing on me, and is definitely different than anything else on the road and looks very serious. But what does bother me though is that Subaru has picked function over form. And what I mean by that is, back when this vehicle first came out, it had a cool whale tail spoiler, even on the WRX version. And it had a giant hood scoop, even for the WX version. And it had cool side vents like a supercar in later generations. But what they've done in the name of performance have eliminated the cool spoiler and the side vents and lowered the hood scoop for better visibility. My point is that if you are going to take away people's theatrics, you're going to have to raise the level of performance to outweigh that lack of passion. And when you do that, you price the enthusiast out of the market. My case in point. I actually, when I was a kid, what I would do is I would take my hockey cards and I would tape them to the spokes of my bike. So when I pedaled, it sounded like a motorbike and I felt like I was flying. And this is the point, that when people drive out of the dealership in their new car, especially one like this that comes from the pedigree that this does, they want the sensation that they're really flying. But despite what you think of the outside looks, we spend most of our time on the inside. So let's take a look at the inside. Now, the second you get into the interior of this new 2022 Subaru WRX, you can tell that they've done their homework. This is a really nice vehicle. Like a lot of Subarus that are coming out in their new generations, Subaru has really done a great job with putting a very expensive looking interior in here. Of course, in the price point that it is, you're going to get some cheaper materials, but for the most part, when you come in here, especially with this aluminum looking material that they have here in the doors and dash, the contours, the shapes, the way everything is angled, there's a lot of detail. The fake looking carbon fiber, I'm assuming that it's fake. Yes, very, very nice interior. Now with that being said as well, what they've also done is try to make it not only look nice, but work well, and even better than before. So these seats here have been reconstructed, so there's a lot more movement back to front, and they're also a lot more ergonomic, comfortable, and hold you in even better around corners with the bolstering. But with that being said, I wish that you could lower these seats down a lot further like you can in a Honda Civic Type R. So even though it's a sedan or a hatchback with that car, you feel really sporty. I have a BRZ and it's a very similar seating position as my BRZ, and I wish that this car would do that as well. But that being said, it's still a fine seating position. It's just not as low as I would like in a sporty car like this. When we move over to the steering wheel, it's a fantastic steering wheel. All models have this leather wrap steering wheel with the contrast red stitching. It's nice and thick. Again, I drive a BRZ with a small diameter steering wheel that is more upright, which I find more sporty and easier to drive in aggressive situations. However, this here still works well. It's just a little bit more angled, but it is telescopic and tilting, and there is a lot of movement to it. I really get, again, like this carbon fiber looking material here with WRX. And Subaru has put these nice convenient features on the steering wheel. You have buttons on the left for your media and buttons on your right for your cruise control and things like that. When we talk about switch gear and buttons, again, really nice looking buttons in here. They feel nice, they look nice, just the clicking and things like that, really, really nice. What else to talk about? When we look at the dash, I love analog gauges, and very similar to the Outback Wilderness that we drove earlier this year, you have analog gauges, but Subaru has raised them out, so they're really prominent and they look nice. Now that center screen here, not a lot of information, but that screen is nice. It's got, it's well lit, crisp, clear, responds well, and it simply just goes through very simple trip type information with fuel economy, that type of thing, what's been connected to the car, just things that you would need at a quick glance. But the thing that I really love that they've included is the boost gauge. Of course, I wish that they had a nice analog one up here somewhere like that. I had an SRT4 when it came out because I couldn't afford this car, the WRX at the time, but they had those cool boost gauges there, so I like that they've kept that. Moving over to the entertainment, or the infotainment I should say, when you get the base WRX, it is only going to have two smaller screens in the same basic shape cavity here that obviously do not look as nice and don't function as well. But you have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay right across the board, which is important because on this Sport version here, although you get this beautiful upgraded 11.6-inch display, you don't have navigation. You've got to get up to the Sport Tech to get navigation. So, but anyway, if you have Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, of course, those work really well because they're live and up to date and all that with traffic, so they'll plug in here. And it's portrait, at least for Apple CarPlay, and it looks really nice on screen. Some of the other features I really like with this infotainment, aside from the fact that it just looks nice and it responds well, and Subaru has a really intuitive, simple infotainment user interface, is that they've kept these hard buttons. So you've got hard buttons for volume, in your tuning, and of course for your climate control. For both sides, you've got temperature up and down, and things you use all the time like your defrosters. Now, even though they've migrated some of the climate control onto the screen here, I do like that it is permanent. What I mean by that is it doesn't matter what app that you go into, you're always going to keep your main climate stuff down here in your menu buttons for home and things like that. So that makes it really convenient, and so you're not going to have to go through a lot of menus, and also it's pretty responsive. So I'll have to turn the system on, but as you can see, it works really, really well. What else to talk about in here? There's lots of storage. So you've got a nice lockable glove compartment here. You've got storage here with a 12-volt plug-in. If you want more plug-ins, you've got USB style ones here and wireless charging pad that fits most phones, and again, that is in all models, which is nice. You do have cup holders in the doors, front and back. They do look like they'd hold a fair amount of water bottles, but if you had one of those big jumbo ones, it's probably not going to fit. Cup holders here in the middle, and we have a manual e-brake, which is great, or a manual emergency brake, and we have our 6-speed manual transmission, famous transmission out of the Subaru that feels nice in the hand, and it's not as long as some years, so it doesn't feel quite as much like a tractor, a little bit more sporty. As I said, what they've done is they've lowered the dash in this vehicle to give you more visibility. Subaru is all about safety. Now, I do think that's a bit of a downside. Obviously, safety is not a downside. You want that. But what I mean is, in a vehicle like this, you want to feel sporty, and a higher belt line, like the old 300s used to have, and that type of idea, and Camaros and things like that, to make you feel like you're really in that car and hunkered down. That would be nice, along with that better driving position. But all in all, lots of greenhouse space in here, lots of light, lots of visibility, great for daily driving. And this model here, you also have your sunroof. Now, with safety features, this car has lots of safety features. We're not going to go in depth on those, but if you want the really fancy upgraded ones through Subaru, unfortunately you will have to get that CVT automatic transmission to get those, but I don't think that you would be missing them. For the most part, the basics are here. So let's take a look at the back. Now, as you can see, it's pretty easy to get back in here. Now, I'm only 5'7", so I'd have to say that the leg room back here is pretty decent because I have this seat back fairly certain, if you've seen one of my vehicles, one of my reviews before, I make the joke to say I'm 5'7", but I like to stay away from that steering wheel, so I'm probably more like 5'9". So as you can see, if you're a 5'9" person in front of you driving, and you're 5'7", you've got tons of leg room here. Sitting up nice and upright, I have a decent amount of headroom, but again, I'm pretty short. So as you can see, because of the slope of this roof and trying to keep it pretty sporty, headroom does get a little bit compromised. But I mean, if you're just using this car for kids and things like that, it's perfect for that because these seats are ergonomic and comfortable. Of course, they have the child seat anchors and all that type of stuff. I haven't tested that, but I own a BRZ and I put a seat back in that car. So again, I'm sure that you could easily get one in here. Not a lot else going on back here, especially in the Sport model. There is some USB plug-ins here and cup holders on the side and on the middle armrest here. But other than that, there's not a lot going on because this car has always been about the focus of the driver, and that's what's most important. But if you do need to put things in the trunk, let's take a quick look. And as you can see, you have lots and lots of room back here. There's a bit of a smaller opening, but that's because this is a performance-oriented vehicle, and the smaller the opening, the more rigid the structure of the vehicle will be to give you better performance for cornering especially. There is tons of room back here, and they've conveniently split the seats 60-40. I have read online that you can actually put a mountain bike in here if you have one of those ones where the tires and the handlebars come off. And I own a BRZ, and if I can fit 4 tires in my car for a track day, I'm fairly certain that you can fit 4 in this one. So I think that this has all the practicality that you would ever need in a car like this, but this car is all about the driving. So let's take it for a drive. Now onto the feels or driving portion of our review. And one of the things that we always like to do is look at our first impressions. And my first impression was actually not today. It was a few days ago. I was able to borrow the vehicle and test it out a little bit. And my first impressions were, to be honest with you, it wasn't nearly as ugly in person as the pictures, if I'm fair. And also, my first impressions were that it is really nice in here compared to any other WRX I've ever been in, including a 2020 that I was in very recently as a comparison to compare with. And also that it handles and is as fast almost as that Civic Type R that I drove. I have no idea. I haven't done an actual true comparison between those two vehicles, but this vehicle really does feel serious. That's how I explain that Civic Type R. It just feels serious. It just, I don't care how much money it is, you just get in it and it feels serious. And this feels the same. Between the look on the outside, the little rumble with the exhaust that they've kept, which is awesome, and no piped in audio or anything like that, it's just a very raw, very aggressive car. Despite the fact that it's now very quiet and very practical as always. So let's move into some more of the testing type features. Now we want to test the straight line acceleration. So as you see, we got up to 100 there fairly quickly. It feels like it's that 5-point-something seconds that they do claim. Similarly, we now want to test the brakes to see what the brakes are like for emergency style type braking. Okay, we're getting up similar speeds that we were before. Hard on the brakes. Now the car handles and stops really composed. And I'm quite surprised. For a car that's 3,500 pounds with just having the 2-piston front and the 1-piston rear, I don't see any problem with this braking at all, including an emergency brake feels. So what we want to do now is test the steering in reality on this, just to see how it actually feels. So we have a little back road here that's windy that we like to do some testing on. So let's give it a try. And of course we would go faster on this little section than you would in reality, but it's to test everything out. And as you can see, this car handles extremely well. for its price point. I recently drove a Honda Civic Type R, and I would have to say this isn't far off that. Now I know this has the all-wheel drive to help it out with the traction and the fancy ability that this system has to move that torque around. However, just how firm this car feels around the corners, the turn-in, the response, this car feels very serious. One of the things we like to check as well is suspension for things like noise, vibration, and harshness, and just overall how do they feel in real world conditions. So right now we're just on a little bumpy gravel road thingy here, and you can see how the wheels are moving. As we said earlier, they've re-engineered the suspension, especially the dampening, to be very firm around corners, as you saw, but also very, very compliant and soft over bumps, potholes, speed bumps, things like that. It's a very, very nice driving car in that regard. It's now time for our final thoughts. We started off this review by saying we were looking to see if this once boy racer econobox could reinvigorate our youthful enthusiasm for driving, yet still get us to where we needed to go in the relative comfort and convenience we've come to expect of adults. And I'd have to say a yes, but a reluctant yes. And a reluctant yes because yes, this vehicle is bigger than it's ever been. It's more comfortable, more safe, more economical, and better performing than it's ever been. However, because of the lack of theatrics, I think that if you're looking to buy this car to relive those posters on your bedroom, you're going to be left wanting. But if you are looking for an amazing daily driver that also happens to be a ton of fun on the weekends, that's also going to get you a lot of looks, then I say you cannot go wrong with the all-new 2022 Subaru WRX Sport Model with manual. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time.